Alright, so it has come to my attention that the 1990 Christmas classic Home Alone has been recently maligned by critics such as those at Vulture Magazine, who placed it criminally low on their latest ranking of Christmas films. The contention of these naysayers is that Home Alone was great when you watched it as a kid, but try to sit through it now and it just won't hold up. But look, I watch Home Alone pretty much every year, and I never find it anything short of genuinely funny, heartwarming, a bit sad in all the right ways, and, above all, eminently satisfying. And that's no accident. Home Alone, written by John Hughes, directed by Chris Columbus, and with music by John Williams, is an unbelievably clear example of tidy, effective storytelling that revolves around somewhat surprisingly spiritual themes. Though it's obviously most famous for the cartoonish house of anti-burglar horrors, Home Alone has far more thematic depth going on under the surface. Really, the entire burglary plot for which it's best remembered is almost extraneous to the heart of the story, which is, and consider this your spoiler warning for the whole film, actually about spiritual atonement. It's neither overly nor overtly religious, but as we'll see, through use of classic storytelling devices including parallelism and the hero's journey, Home Alone isn't just a Christmas movie because it takes place over Christmas. Though, to be clear, in my opinion, the themes it evokes aren't limited to Christmas or Christianity, certainly. There's a universality to Home Alone that's smartly anchored in specificity around one holiday as a time of reflection, honesty, and love. Structurally, Home Alone follows three major plots anchored by three major perspectives. Plot A is obviously Kevin McCallister, played to absolute perfection by Macaulay Culkin, as he handles independence once he's home alone. Plot B follows his mother, Kate, as she desperately tries to get home to him from France. And Plot C follows Harry Lime, as he and his even stupider partner Marv pilfer the holiday-abandoned Chicago suburbs and have their eye on Kevin's house in particular. Only one moment of the film exists beyond these three perspectives, quickly showing us the rest of the family hanging out in France, and apparently that's a remnant of a fourth plot strand that didn't perform well with test audiences. But beyond that quick flash, which I actually like because we otherwise might wonder what's going on there, Home Alone is utterly neat and precise. And before looking at some of the details of storytelling here, it's worth noting something interesting right off the bat. Even if you haven't seen the film, again, you probably know a fair amount about its humor and tone. Home Alone, the toy traps, Kevin himself, they've been memed to high hell, used as bases for legal debates over self-defense and torts, and obviously as references in other films and shows.
Lisa, haven't you seen Home Alone? If some burglars come, it'll be a very humorous and entertaining situation.
And as Homer says, the burglary is indeed a humorous situation, but that in and of itself is an interesting choice. The more obvious setup would be for plot C to be the dramatically heavy storyline, genuinely threatening, not necessarily to the point of true horror, but holding the most gravity. Instead, what we have here is that plots A and B are actually heavy enough to warrant the need for some comic relief through plot C. And don't get me wrong, if you're watching as a kid in particular, there are some scary moments, but Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern as Harry and Marv carefully balance the sinister with the buffoonish to great effect, keeping the emotional emphasis on other parts of the story. And yes, over the years, people have pointed out plot holes in Home Alone, some of which I think are explained in details, but others which do indeed stretch plausibility. But when a film is otherwise this well written, this thematically concise, and dramatically well structured, I personally have a great latitude to suspend disbelief. Additionally, though Home Alone obviously takes place in our reality, there are a few almost magical elements that almost shift the genre away. So, to take a look at why Home Alone remains a borderline flawless classic over 30 years after its release, this video will look at the absolutely remarkable efficiency of the opening sequence, and then turn to Home Alone's use of the hero's journey for the one and only Kevin McCallister. As we'll see, Home Alone isn't quite the film it's marketed or remembered as. It's actually more interesting and thematically mature than it seems, much like its own precocious protagonist. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe to help me reach wider audiences, and if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much and welcome back.
Then say it again. Maybe it'll happen.
I hope I never see any jerks again.
We're starting with this opening sequence because it really can be studied as a masterclass in efficiency. We have a panoply of character introductions, a launch of plot and intrigue, definition of the story world, and a genuinely impressive assortment of background details. This scene is packed with iconic one-liners, the set is just dripping in Christmas colors and signs of life. We're thrown into a frenetic circus of a big young family with every level of chaos dialed up for humor but not past the point of plausibility at all. It's so saturated with sensory details and vivid background characters that it's almost too easy to miss just how much is established here, so let's take a look. This opening scene shows the McCallister extended family scrambling to prep for their early flight to France the next morning. We meet our three main perspectives in the first 2 minutes of the film. First, though we don't know it's him yet, we see Harry dressed as a cop trying to get someone's attention. Throughout the scene, he'll seem pretty legit, just checking up on neighborhood security, but we'll get 2 clues that he's up to something. One, when the Nero's Pizza guy jokes, "Are you just around for the holidays?" he makes an ominous response. And second, Kevin notes his gold tooth, which in 90s kid movie language is basically villainware. We then hop to Kate scrambling around on the phone, and she's discussing A, how many people will be out of town this year, and B, that the family has put their dog in the kennel. We see right away she's stressed and a bit uptight, a trait that will continue as other adults barrage her with questions and responsibilities. She's also impeccably well dressed, it's Catherine O'Hara, so obviously she's beautiful, but also finely kept hair, makeup, tailored clothes, operating with a business-like authority. We see a clado ring amongst her fancy jewelry. Kate is a character whose depth is in the details. And I just want to note here that the McCallisters are, just from the first shot of the film, obviously very wealthy. But as with that aforementioned Christmas theme, this specificity doesn't get in the way of the film's relatability. There's this notion, I think, that for characters to be relatable, they have to be similar to the audience, and I don't want every film to be about super rich people, but it is deeply effective to make your characters look and feel real. I don't come to Home Alone knowing what it's like to be Kate, but I leave the film feeling like I do, and that makes all the difference. This kind of specificity is likewise evident in all the background details we see around the house. It's remarkably rich and lived in, particular to its decade and social class and style, and every time I watch it, I feel like I know what it's like to walk down those halls. We then switch to Kevin, who's come in to complain that Uncle Frank won't let him watch a movie with the big kids. He's scolded for getting on his parents' bed, and then Kate tells him to go clean up some toys because his aunt tripped on them and nearly broke her back. Kate and Peter tell Kevin off for playing around with glue guns and fish hooks, items we'll see later. Kate then tells him to pack his suitcase, to which he responds with abject horror. That's a task well beyond his capacity. Now, you don't have to pay attention to all these details for the film to work. Before watching this film closely for this video, I never noticed that Kate mentions a dog, but I also never even registered a dog's absence. This is just absolutely fantastic, clever writing, because all while packing in these little details that may or may not emerge later, this dialogue sets the tone of the film and establishes key norms for Kevin's regular life. He's not allowed to do anything, adults are always telling him off, he's a little whiny and can't do basic stuff on his own, which is fine, he's a kid, but it matters here, and crucially, when he was screwing around with his dad's stuff, he was making Christmas ornaments, indicating a sweet interior. Again, that's just 2 minutes. The rest of the opening sequence introduces a range of family members, and it's packed with iconic one-liners that demonstrate each and every one of them has their own little character with their own distinct traits.
You're what the French call les incompetents.
Including, of course, the bully older brother Buzz, who has a slightly elevated role as Kevin's principal tormentor. These relatively disposable background characters absolutely leap off the screen, because the writers bothered to make them vivid and memorable. They all mock him for Kevin's inability to do anything on his own. No one cares about him. It's brutal. Kevin's gonna say some nasty stuff later, so we have to have this scene to understand why and feel for him even at his worst. We meet a few other key figures here. One is Old Man Marley. One, Old Man Marley, who the kids call the South Bend Shovel Slayer, and they all believe him to have murdered his entire family. Buzz makes even the line "he's salting the sidewalk" sound ominous when that's a blatantly nice thing to do, and the music communicates real gravity and fear around him. We also meet the pizza guy, who Kevin will call later. And look, Kevin could have ordered pizza on his own later, and it would have been perfectly plausible that he knows how it works even without this scene. But working this element of Kevin's life into the opening scene both creates a more cohesive, tightly wound story world in this town, and quietly contributes to Kevin's brand of resourcefulness later on. But nothing in this scene does just one thing, of course. We also get details like Frank not having any money, Peter needing Kate's wallet to pay, adding to her stress and responsibility, Buzz being the one who ordered the pizza and didn't get enough plain cheese for Kevin, all fleshing out family dynamics and contributing to Kevin's sense of being bullied and cast aside. Also, I just gotta note my personal favorite background detail of the entire film. So, as a play on the chain Little Caesars, the pizza place here is called Little Nero's, and their slogan is "No fiddling around," a reference to how legend has it that the Roman Emperor Nero played the fiddle as Rome burned under his rule, and it further echoes lines from the beginning and end of the film.
Did I burn down the joint? I don't think so.
It's pretty cool that you can burn the place down.
I just love that little detail, but we also need to see this kind of chaos, including, for example, the spilled milk, getting Kevin's boarding pass tossed out, to understand how Kevin was left behind. When you sit back and think about it, it is pretty crazy that no one noticed he was gone, even in the mad rush. This is how those plot holes start to emerge in Home Alone, but as you're watching, you don't feel that unlikelihood, and that's proof of a well-crafted and communicated story world. But of course, the main point of this scene, the huge inciting incident of the story, is Kevin's huge fight with Kate. This cataclysmic fight puts Kevin and Kate on equal standing, represented visually by Kevin's position on the stairs and in the symmetry of their words.
Just stay up there. I don't want to see you again for the rest of the night.
I don't want to see you again for the rest of my whole life.
It's a realistic, non-violent confrontation, but it's pretty harsh from each of them, and for Kevin, it's enough to wish his family would disappear. And they do. And actually, as one of the early signs of the spiritual elements of this film, the storm is filmed to have a mystical feel. There's a real explanation for why Kevin wakes up to an empty house, but the filmmakers include this almost magical one too. Both realities can exist here, and that will come up later. In this fight scene, Kevin also makes an appeal not to share a bed with Fuller.
He wets the bed. He'll pee all over me. I know it.
Fine. We'll put him somewhere else.
And not to overanalyze here, but I love this quick beat where Kate sees that getting peed on in the attic is just one step too far. Obviously, Fuller can't stay with Kevin, that would ruin the plot, but it also shows that even in this fight, she is just trying her best as a mom. He pushes her too far here, but she's not a one-dimensional bad parent. There's also a similar flash later on as she wonders if sitting separately from the kids in first class was mean, and here we get the firm sense that they're both saying things they don't entirely mean.
You'd feel pretty sad if you woke up tomorrow morning and you didn't have a family.
No, I wouldn't.
But before turning to how Kevin and Kate each process this mishap, we gotta note one final character we meet in this opening scene, and that's the house. No, it's not a sentient entity, I'm saying character figuratively here, though early scripts involved horrific dream sequences with parts of the house coming to life and tormenting Kevin. And actually, that thought is very telling, and this is a great transferable lesson for screenwriting overall. So the base setting of any story should feel alive and meaningful. Whether it's the Titanic or the Shire, the container for the story should have a feel and a meaning held by the characters who inhabit it. For Kevin, and for any kid, a home is an entire world. This sort of decreases as you get older, but it remains true that every room has its own feel. There were those special zones you weren't allowed in as a kid. Some rooms just feel very adult and scary. I do wish that we had a slightly better understanding of the house's layout, but for the story purposes, we know all we need to know, and we can explore it and inhabit it just as Kevin does. And that's just one singular sequence of Home Alone. Cop asks when they're leaving, teenager delivers pizza, havoc ensues, Kevin's sent to the attic, wishes his family away. This level of detail and efficiency is absolutely remarkable, and now we get to the motion of the story.
Can't seem to find my toothbrush, so I'll pick one up when I go out today. Other than that, I'm in good shape.
Considering the premise and tone of the film, it might come as a surprise that Plot A in Home Alone is structured very closely around the epic, archetypal hero's journey. When it comes to screenwriting, I typically refer to Christopher Vogler's 12-step adaptation of Joseph Campbell's original, and we're not going to walk through it step by step here, particularly because Home Alone, like many other iterations of the journey, doesn't involve each and every one of these steps in a certain order. But broadly speaking, any version of the hero's journey, whether it's Vogler's or Dan Harmon's even simpler map, all involve a hero going from an ordinary world to an extraordinary world and back again, facing challenges along the way that build towards one particular ordeal or discovery through which the hero accomplishes some new power or understanding that forever alters their experience back in the ordinary world. It's an eminently satisfying scaffolding for any genre, and when employed well, should involve a meaningful connection between external and internal hurdles for the hero. And you'd probably assume that for Kevin, everything is building towards the home invasion showdown. But what we'll see here is that that plot is almost irrelevant to the true journey of the film. So that opening sequence obviously established the ordinary world for Kevin, a state of being that sucks so much he wishes his whole family away. That wish summons the all-important storm, Kevin is left alone, and he enters a special world without even leaving his house. He crosses the threshold as he realizes what happened, and crucially, he doesn't realize that they forgot him and went to France. He realizes he made it happen.
Made my family disappear.
From here, we have the iconic childlike celebrations. Kevin gets everything he was denied before, including that movie the big kids got to watch, and access to forbidden rooms of the house. Here we get a whole handful of Chekhov's guns as Kevin scoops up key tools he will use later. And we'll focus on Kevin here, but the film also cuts to plots B and C throughout Kevin's journey. These each constitute their own mini-stories. Plot C is a slapstick action comedy, and Plot B is a simple but almost absurdist odyssey, and it's all revolving around Kevin in ways he's unaware of. Plot B also establishes spiritual parallelism between Kevin and Kate through timely and often funny editing. As we'll see, Kevin eventually discovers his own regret. Kate's, though, is instant. She's had a major failure as a mother, right? None of the other adults seem to care that much, but she's in agony. As the rest of the family books a flight for 3 days later, a little nod to Jesus right there, Kate is just as alone as Kevin, desperately hitchhiking her way home. Kevin and Kate are each on their own journeys towards each other. Kate's distance is physical and Kevin's is internal, but they both end up in the same place. But for now, Kevin is having a blast, but the journey into the special world isn't all fun and games. As the gangster movie reminds him, adults are mean and scary, and Kevin cries out for his mom more than once. Here begins the legwork of his development, and it's incremental. Step by step, Kevin slowly confronts fears and challenges that require him to step into a role greater than himself. He goes further and further into this special realm of independence and adulthood. This is where we get to have fun in the film and enjoy the plain comedy of a kid acting out his idea of what adulthood is. One of the best details here is Kevin's use of aftershave. It's an iconic scene the first time he tries it out and screams, but crucially, he does it again later on. As he spends more time alone, Kevin's not just doing all the fun stuff he wasn't allowed to, he's doing things he thinks he should. There are a few standout trials along the way at this point in the hero's journey, so Kevin's pushed out of the house by his need for a toothbrush. As predicted earlier, it's probably in a suitcase in France right now, but despite his confidence at the register, Kevin gets scared of Marley again and ends up running from the cops, declaring sadly to himself that he's now a criminal. This, I'd argue, explains his not calling them and feeling the need to trap the burglars at the neighbor's house later, but this is a huge failure for him along the way. It's his first foray into the real world, and it's a disaster. But on his way home, he runs into the bad guys. This silly chase scene is actually a major turning point for both plots A and C. Harry realizes something's up with this kid, and for Kevin, though these guys are scary, they're material. Unlike the world of adulthood at large, he can wrap his head around them, and the prompt of fear urges a summoning of courage, a revitalization after the toothbrush fiasco. We also meet a new location, the church, which serves here as Kevin's sanctuary for not the last time, and it's elevated to a spiritually safe place as we hear the burglars say that they wouldn't go in there. As another trial on his journey, Kevin orders a pizza and tries out his soundboard trick, not just to exchange money with the delivery guy, but also to terrorize him for the hell of it, functioning as a sort of dry run for his higher stakes defenses later. The pizza is a material step further into the special world. Kevin's here done something on his own, and he gets the big reward he was earlier denied. He buys groceries, fully mimicking adulthood here. We are seeing incremental progress for Kevin's independence. This film is packed with visual meaning, so he buys milk, which neatly parallels the opening spill sequence, and symbolically nods to Kevin starting to clean up after himself in a symbolic corrective for his earlier havoc. This is material development in the hero's journey. This is the kid that couldn't pack his own suitcase, and it directly ties to his internal progress, too. He's able to scare off the burglars using silhouettes, which was how they scared him initially, but Plot C is closing in, Mom's on her way, but obviously won't get there in time. Now, I saw a review online that highlighted what the author took to be an ironic flaw of the film. So Home Alone is ostensibly about a kid learning how much he needs his family, but his ability to conquer fears and defend himself simultaneously proves his independence. But that, in my view, is not a flaw. That's the core feature. When we look at the pacing of this hero's journey, sure enough, we see Kevin slowly confronting his fears, but he misses his family anyway. That's the point. Love for the sake of love. I think it's pretty common for kids to get angry at their families and think, man, if only I could do all this crap by myself, drive a car, make dinner, whatever, I wouldn't need these overlords. But Kevin's journey of atoning for his bad wish is a slow realization that even if he can do those things, he cares about his family anyway. And on that note, you might think that looking at the hero's journey, Kevin's ultimate ordeal is the final confrontation with Harry and Marv, but in my view of Home Alone, it actually comes one scene earlier.
I really like my family, even though sometimes I say I don't. Sometimes I even think I don't. Do you get that?
I think so. How you feel about your family is a complicated thing.
As we move towards the final act of the film, Kevin critically overhears the baddies saying that they'll return to his house at 9 o'clock that night. That's just another throwaway screenwriting lesson. We know something bad is coming, and the audience knows exactly when, building up great suspense. But before we get to the film's ultimate hijinks, Kevin reaches the inmost cave of his hero's journey towards adulthood and maturity. Remember, Kevin thinks he made his family disappear. He doesn't know that they're in Paris trying to get back to him. And even after figuring out how to do most things alone, he wants them back. So he heads to Santa's village.
Instead of presents this year, I just want my family back.
This isn't a Hail Mary rescue me plea. It's Christmas Eve. The burglars are coming back later that night. This isn't a material problem he's trying to solve. It's an internal one. This is a huge step for Kevin, who also demonstrates that he is still a kid.
I know you're not the real Santa Claus. I'm old enough to know how it works.
All right.
But I also know that you work for him.
But there's still further to go even in this sort of scene. As he walks home, Kevin sees families celebrating together, and this frame alone really captures the melancholic essence of Christmas. Yes, holidays are fun and bright, etc., but they can also be sad and lonely and all those things at once. And Home Alone doesn't need to announce that truth for us, for the audience to feel it here through the eyes of this little lost 8-year-old. He is feeling that ache that's worse than not getting any cheese pizza. On his way home from Santa's village, Kevin finds himself drawn to the very church that already saved him once before. Again, this film makes fantastic use of symmetry and consistent symbolism, and Kevin sits alone in a truly adult place of spiritual solace. Also note that Santa's village was staffed by teenagers, representing an intermediary step between childhood and adulthood. Here, Kevin reaches the peak of his inner journey, and he's joined by another lonely soul, old man Marley himself. Now, I'm not religious myself, but this man's gentle certainty in church as a place where you're always welcome gets me every time. Marley doesn't explicitly mention God or praying or religion at all. In Home Alone, it's the simple act of seeking forgiveness that in turn earns it. And I know we're just talking about a kid who yelled at his mom here, it's not that deep, but it's a lovely parable for the power and possibility of redemption for those who seek it. Kevin and Marley share confessionals and regrets, we learn why Marley's family is never around, and the simple act of having someone bear witness to your honesty and reflection seems to offer each of them a very sincere form of solace and recognition. Finally, here, an adult who treats Kevin like one. And Kevin now can reach the pinnacle of his internal journey, not only admitting his own wrongs, but also offering Marley some wisdom.
I'm afraid if I call him, he won't talk to me.
I've always been afraid of our basement. Then I made myself go down there to do some laundry, and I found out it's not so bad. All this time I've been worrying about it, but if you turn on the lights, it's no big deal.
What's your point?
My point is, you should call your son.
Fear has been a prominent theme throughout Home Alone, and Kevin's relationship to it has marked his journey into maturity. So here, Kevin uses a parable from his time alone to encourage Marley to call his son. This, to me, is a clear echo of the Lessons and Carols Christmastime church service, where you take lessons from little stories about Jesus and sing carols without being overtly religious. Home Alone here weaves in subtextual themes of redemption, forgiveness, and renewal. And it's no accident. The hero's journey itself, as articulated by Joseph Campbell, is a cross-cultural, monomythic story of rebirth that's found across many cultures and religions. The step from Santa's village, where Kevin can totally comprehend what he thinks is going on, to church, where something about the spiritual power here is quietly moving Kevin in ways he can't fully understand or articulate, wonderfully invokes more than it announces, letting the audience involve ourselves in what we feel and reflect on in the spiritual quiet, whatever that might look like for each of us. And obviously, when you're little, Christmas is all about Santa, so there's a very plain step taken here as Kevin searches for something more. We've seen and heard plenty of angel imagery throughout the film, and since this is almost a It's a Wonderful Life inverted story, it makes perfect sense for Marley to function as a guardian angel for Kevin at this point. He's perhaps named for the soul-redeeming warning ghost in A Christmas Carol, and I can't claim to have noticed this myself, but his hands are decreasingly bandaged as the film progresses, indicating both healing and Kevin's capacity to understand Marley for who he is rather than who Buzz says he is. And interestingly, as a guardian archetype, Marley's contribution to Kevin's development is more in taking advice than in giving it, marking the peak of Kevin's introspective maturity. This scene, this open connection between Kevin and the one guy who scared him more than anything, held in a place too sacred for the burglars to even enter, is the emotional peak of Home Alone, the moment our hero demonstrates his new strength, and it's got nothing to do with defensive traps, it's wisdom, atonement, and forgiveness of self and others. And from here, the momentum of the film picks up a big time, and we have a huge genre switch from melancholic drama to slapstick comedy, actually marked by the soundtrack and remixing Carol of the Bells as Kevin runs out of the church, and shots of Kevin jogging home remind us that he's just this little guy in a big, huge world. Christmas lights, though, filling the night with hope and energy, and then Kevin gets to work setting up his defenses, all overseen by the other angelic figure in this film, Buzz's tarantula. Now, I view Kevin's grand plan to defend his home as a bit of a gesture towards his absent family. It's the one thing he can do to protect that little world, but I do wish that we had seen him either consider hiding away up until he talks to Marley, or in his defensive plans using something that he discovered in his independence. I don't want to distract from the heart and soul of the film, which is that church scene, but this slapstick sequence is just a little too disjointed from everything else for me. Marley does eventually come to his rescue in a classic Boo Radley move, but that's not quite a result of their earlier conversation, and it is indeed weird that Marley either doesn't notice or doesn't care that Kevin is on his own, which obviously adds some weight to the spiritual nature of his presence here, but is hard not to notice as a bit of a plot hole. I do think we could have fleshed him out as even more of a social outsider if, at the beginning of the film, we heard the adults have their own set of rumors about him, which would also explain why the McCallisters never call him to check on Kevin. Marley does say that he knows there's bad stuff about him going around, so we can infer that kind of thing, but at this point in the film, we're fully in the realm of the implausible anyway. Now, I won't break down this iconic stretch of the film. It's just worth noting that several of the items Kevin uses were identified already in that opening sequence. We don't cut back to plot B at all, letting plots A and C collide with full momentum. This stunt work is sort of batshit good and well executed, but really implausible at the same time. Plot C may as well be animated. It's a very bouncy segment of film. It is a kid's movie, and I ignore any and all complaints about how it's too violent or implausible. Do I personally find it captivating at this point in my life? No, but it's not written for people my age. And after a genuinely deep introspective beat, it makes perfect sense to lean into the comedy at the heart of the film. And of course, Kevin then miraculously tidies up the house just in time for Christmas, or the entire burglary never happened and the gold tooth at the end is just a little wink to Christmas magic. That's one of the many fan theories about this film, but it did occur to me as I was mapping out the plots here and realized plot C never really impacts anything. It's true that Harry and Marv, and this final showdown in particular, really stretches plausibility in a way that the rest of the film rather doesn't, but I love and find it entirely appropriate for a kid's Christmas film that the ostensibly scariest part of the movie is actually the silliest, operating in a genre of its own and balancing out the heartwarming and heartbreaking notes. I think the split plot lines here do well to represent different genres and different realities. Just as that opening storm was both real and mystical, it doesn't really matter if the burglary happened in reality or in Kevin's head, especially in a kids' movie. Both can be true at once. But to be clear, I don't actually believe that that's the filmmaker's intent. I think we should just accept Home Alone on its own terms and appreciate the balancing act of genres, plot symmetries, and external and internal journeys for our hero. And of course, all while his family was gone, Kevin was setting up Christmas anyway. And just as the burglars represent the same material threat of the Grinch, Kevin is like a lone little who decorating his own little tree because Christmas will come anyway. And at the end of all his little marches towards adulthood, he still earnestly believes in Santa. And he has no reason not to. He gets his second wish for his family to return, and Kate arrives home. This, in the hero's journey, is the mark of the road back to the ordinary world. Perfect, satisfying resolution to plots A and B as they embrace. Then the family, of course, storms in, and Kevin gets the approval and warmth that was so viciously denied to him at the start of the film. Now, Home Alone could have given Kate her own journey. We could imagine a hyper-materialist rich lady discovering the importance of family or something, but the film instead maintains narrative balance through dramatic emphasis on Kevin by keeping her emotionally static. Plenty of other films, especially crappy holiday ones, cram in as many arcs as possible to distract you from their shoddy composition and lack of thematic messaging, but Home Alone is dramatically confident film that knows Kevin is the star. And that doesn't make Kate's journey meaningless. I'm sure if she could go back to her decision to stand by at the airport in France, she would do her whole odyssey all over again rather than wait for the next flight as the rest of the family did. She couldn't just sit there and wait. She had to do something to atone, and she earned those few extra moments of forgiveness with Kevin. But remember, from Kevin's perspective, even if he later hears them explain what happened, he thinks his family disappeared and reappeared because he wished it both ways. From his perspective, their return was his choice, so in his world, he earned that spiritual forgiveness just as Kate did. And finally, Kevin gets to see Old Man Marley make things right on Christmas morning. It's a wonderful tie-in to Kevin's own resolution, obviously, but also, what could be a greater sign of maturity than seeing someone happy that they took your advice? So there we have it, an all-time classic, proved, in my opinion, to be a classic for a good reason. Familiar storytelling structures, parallelism, a coherent theme, the hero's journey, along with goofy slapstick comedy, operating in perfect tandem to land what is, in my opinion, the ultimate Christmas movie, embodying themes and resolutions that are particular to the holiday but universal in relevance. Home Alone, like It's a Wonderful Life, highlights the value of things present in life by examining the effects of their imagined absence, all while maintaining a largely comical tone and impressively oriented child perspective, taking in things that feel like the entire world. Kevin's occasional self-narration, steady confidence with moments of earnest confusion and fear, looking directly at the camera, all carry relatively heavy themes with effective lightness. It's filmed beautifully, in a way that highlights the difference between a kid's perspective and an adult's. And if you watch even just that opening sequence again, you can see how organically the camera transitions from one hub of activity to another, effectively immersing us, the audience, as part of the household, part of the story world. I call Home Alone the ultimate Christmas film because it involves those holiday themes as more than a backdrop. It reaches from the wordless lows of this time of year to the almost magical heights, balancing multiple genres and tones, all through nearly flawless storyboarding. Beyond story structure, other tools like visual motifs, musical cues, and settings are dramatically amplified in ways many other films and shows these days completely overlook. And look, I've obviously been overwhelmingly positive about Home Alone, but to be clear, I know it's not a groundbreaking, original, or deeply artistic masterpiece, but for a family holiday film, it's an absolute home run. So if you're watching around Christmas time and you celebrate it, happy Christmas, and either way, thank you so very much for your time, and please like and subscribe for more. Thanks, guys.